The 6th Invitational 2025 recently came to a close, with FaZe Clan taking the win over Team BDS in an extremely close final, ultimately going in favor of the Brazilian side. However, as I was watching the grand final, I noticed something that felt like I've seen it before. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but that's until I decided to go onto Wikipedia and look at previous SIs while waiting for the third map. And that's when I discovered that the 6th Invitational has played out very similarly for the last couple of years, ever since 2023. I have spotted some mind-blowing coincidences between the last 3 events, and in this video I want to share what I have found with you guys. But before I tell you about those crazy coincidences that I found, let's take a quick look at how these events have unfolded one by one. Starting off with SI 2023. In 2023, roughly 2 weeks or so before the 6th Invitational had started, G2 Esports signed Benjamaster, who would prove to be a key player in the run to lifting the hammer. In the group stage, G2 would only lose once to W7M, missing out on first place by just 1 point. If they had secured the first place, G2 would have gotten a golden ticket straight to the upper bracket quarterfinal, skipping a whole round in the playoff bracket. For their first match in the playoffs, they faced off against a fellow European team, Wolves Esports. The series was pretty close, while the 2-0 scoreline in favor of Wolves doesn't really reflect that. Both maps did go to overtime, but Wolves were just better at closing out the maps, and they sent G2 straight to the lower bracket, where if they lost a single best of 3 series, they were out of the competition. From that point onwards, G2 had to win 6 best of 3 series in a row just to get to the final, which they managed to do, defeating every opponent in their way, which includes Wolves Esports, the team that threw G2 into the lower bracket in the first place. Once they reached the final, they saw a familiar face. W7M, the team that had beaten G2 all the way back in the group stage, were the last team that stood in between them and the hammer. For the first map, they played on Clubhouse, G2's weakest map and W7M's strongest map. Although they did kind of struggle on their best map, only winning 7-5. Afterwards, the Brazilian side got defeated convincingly on the following 2 maps, losing 7-2 on Bank and 7-4 on Cafe. Heading into Oregon, the scoreline would be 2-1 in favor of G2. They would just need to win 1 more map to secure the hammer. And Oregon, which was the next map, was a strong map for the both of them, and it played out much closer than the previous 2 maps, going into overtime. However, G2 would swiftly win back-to-back rounds in overtime, taking the series 3-1 and becoming the 2023 World Champions. And remember when I talked about G2 signing Benja? Well, he was crowned MVP for the tournament after only being on the team for 30 days. What a mad lad.
Do not attempt to board the helicopter.
After losing the hammer to G2, W7M would go on and win the following 2 majors and qualify first seed for the 6th Invitational in Brazil that year, being massive favorites to win this time around after failing to do so the year prior. In the group stage, W7M ended off with the exact same point tally and match record as Virtus Pro. However, VP would take the top spot of the group because they had beaten W7M earlier on game day 3. Just like G2 the year prior, W7M had to play against Wolves Esports in the first round, and they lost 2-1 to the French side, getting knocked down to the lower bracket, after which they made an incredible run through the lower bracket, even having to beat an old rival, G2, who themselves got knocked down there by FaZe Clan. And speaking of FaZe Clan, they were the last team that W7M had to face off against in the final. Not only was this an all-Brazilian final in front of a Brazilian crowd, but one of the players on W7M, Nade, would see a familiar face on the opposing side. It was his twin brother Handy, playing for FaZe. Since the two were playing for opposing sides, only one of the twins would come out victorious. Now may the better brother win. The final was a real nail-biter. It was back and forth the whole way, with FaZe Clan taking the lead while W7M had to play catch-up, equalizing until the 5th and final map. With the scoreline being 2-2, whichever team won this map would win the entire tournament. It started out very dominant from FaZe, going up 6-1 match point, being just one round away from lifting the hammer. But that's when W7M pulled off a miracle comeback, winning 7 rounds in a row, taking it to overtime, making the end score 8-6, and winning SI 2024. Nade had done it. He had become world champion, and he had to beat his twin brother to get there. This was a one-of-a-kind of a run from W7M, winning both majors and SI within the same year. This had never been achieved before. It was the first in history. After SI, W7M would disband and the championship winning roster would move to a different org, that being Furia, who had been out of competitive Siege for about a year or so.
Metro Boomin, make it boom.
FaZe Clan entered the 6th Invitational 2025 as the 2nd seed in the world, looking to get revenge and win the hammer that had escaped them the year prior. Being just one round away, they had lost to W7M. Handy had lost to his twin brother Nade. On the final day of the group stage, FaZe Clan played against the team that had stolen the hammer right from their noses. It might be a different org now, but it's still the exact same roster that defeated FaZe for the hammer the year before. Furia would come out on top once again, claiming the first place in the group. FaZe then played against SSG for their first matchup in the playoffs, losing after 2 incredibly close maps, having lost both in overtime. For Handy to be a world champion like his brother, he had to make the same incredible run through the lower bracket like he did the year before. And so he did, with the help of his teammates. They defeated every opponent in their way. They even got a rematch against SSG a couple rounds later, which they won after clutching out an OT on the 2nd map. 2 rounds after that, they were met by Furia in the last round before the grand final. The defending world champions had just lost to Team BDS, who were now waiting for their opponent in the grand final. Handy got his 3rd shot at beating his brother at SI. And as they say, the 3rd time's the charm. For Handy, it certainly was. FaZe had beaten Furia 2-0 to make their way into the grand final, one best of 5 series away from becoming world champions. For the first map, BDS would choose Chalet, where FaZe looked kinda lost, not knowing what they were doing, until a technical timeout, which threw BDS off track and they started losing some sloppy rounds, eventually taking it to overtime, where they managed to still take the map, but to be honest, BDS should have closed the map out sooner. Following maps would be pretty close, however, they wouldn't be close enough, as FaZe Clan would win the 3 maps in a row to win SI 2025. Now, Handy and Nade are the first pair of twin brothers to be world champions in Siege esports history. So now that we have gone through the individual events, we can move on to the overlaps between the runs. While these events were filled with individual storylines, like Benja becoming MVP just 30 days after joining G2, Nade having to beat his twin brother Handy for the hammer in the final the next year, and Handy becoming world champion the year after that, making him and Nade the first pair of twins to be world champions in Siege history. The coincidences that take place in these runs that I'm going to present to you are so mind-blowing. And first of all, I want to start off with the smaller ones, like the fact that each of the 3 teams have lost the first map in the grand final, which isn't too surprising as the opposing side always had first choice before any bans could happen, as they made their way into the final through the upper bracket, giving them the advantage in the map veto. The second coincidence is how each of the teams had defeated the team that they struggled against before, like G2 beating Wolves, who knocked them into the lower bracket in the first place, or how W7M had to defeat G2, having lost the hammer to them the year prior, or even Handy beating his brother, who he lost the hammer to the year before. However, the biggest coincidence and the one that stood out to me the most is how these three teams had the exact same path to lifting the hammer. All of them finished second in their group, all of them lost their first playoffs match, and then going on a crazy run through the lower bracket to reach the final. As for why I even made this video, it's really just because I thought that what I found was an interesting topic to talk about, and I haven't seen anybody as of now talking about how these three events have so many similarities between them. So I decided to make a video about it and share what I found with you guys. Also, this is my first time making a video like this, so I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to my channel for more Rainbow Six Siege content. However, this is where I'm gonna call it for this video, and I just want to thank you for watching this video with all my heart, and I'll see you in the next one. Later, sucker.